Today's talk is titled Postcards from Your Spiritual Journey, to be delivered by Joseph Bednarik. Joseph Bednarik worked for over 30 years in literary publishing, most recently as a co-publisher of Copper Canyon Press, a nonprofit publisher dedicated to poetry. Joseph is a frequent speaker at UU congregations in the Pacific Northwest and recently published a book of his Sunday morning talks entitled Invited to Speak. Tell it true, make it vivid, keep it tight.
So first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to come and worship with you this morning or be together with you this morning. I want to say that it's always powerful for me to be in the presence of joys and sorrows. And I love the phrase that I'm going to take from today's joys and sorrows is comfortable in the universe. I think that's one of the reasons why I come or attend congregational meetings every Sunday. The sermon this morning, or the message this morning, is called Postcards from Your Spiritual Journey. And it really was catalyzed by a conversation that I had last year with an elderly gentleman who is preparing to celebrate his 90th birthday. Part of his preparation for turning 90 was to rid himself of physical stuff. And while I was discussing with him the deliberate process of how he's moving the things out of his life, he said this incredibly gorgeous sentence. I want to write, W-R-I-T-E. I want to write my spiritual journey. And I thought, oh man, how glorious. I thought, and I wondered whether the release of the physical objects of his life provided the necessary mental and creative and heart space for him to consider spiritual matters. Because more than inheriting a vase made by a famous potter or a vintage dartboard, I'm certain that his family would much rather have a memoir of his spiritual journey written in his own words. And in reflecting on that ambitious statement, I want to write my spiritual journey, I came to realize that our individual and our specific and our idiosyncratic spiritual journey, it just might be the deepest realm of our autobiography, of our lived experience on this planet. So I asked him, what's one of your stories? Imagine writing me a postcard from along the way. Well, he said. And so as we begin this morning with a sermon entitled Postcards from Your Spiritual Journey, I'd like to share with you a verbal postcard that's going to help frame our time together. I recently presented a sermon at a Unitarian Universalist congregation wherein two foundational concepts from classical mathematics helped illustrate some broader points about religion. The concepts mentioned were one, the simple fact that parallel lines never meet, and two, the transitive property of equality, which states that if A equals B and B equals C, then A is going to equal C. This is bedrock math, provided a foundation for this really fun sermon. We played with the idea of that metaphorical equal sign. We compared wisdom statements between the Buddha, between Jesus, and Lao Tzu. For example, here are two wisdom statements that find home in the Golden Rule file. Jesus said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And Buddha said, consider others as yourself. Dreamy Sunday, I know. But remember, this story, it is set at a Unitarian Universalist congregation. We just spent 20 minutes interweaving bedrock math and religious wisdom statements. And immediately after the sermon, a retired doctor met me at the pulpit, all but ran to the pulpit and said, you're not quite right about that equal sign. And I was heartened that he softened the message by saying I wasn't quite right, then rather flat out informing me that I was wrong. Now, our good doctor continued, quote, in quantum mathematics, A doesn't necessarily equal C. Now, his eyes were sparkling as I welcomed the feedback. And I said that I needed to brush up on my quantum mathematics. Uh, and then at coffee hour, a retired professor of brain science told me, quote, in Euclidean plane geometry, parallel lines never meet. But quantum mechanics suggests that parallel lines may meet. Again, her eyes were sparkling as I welcomed the feedback and said that I needed to brush up on my quantum mathematics or mechanics. And then how wonderful, I thought, because even the certainty of an equal sign and parallel lines is air quotes certainty in a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Now, what the sparkling eyes of the doctor and the sparkling eyes of the professor betrayed is that delight that we have in broadening context, right? And reminding us that what we see with our own eyes, that what we think with our own mind, may not necessarily reflect ultimate reality. Now, that's a very Platonic notion, capital U, ultimate, capital R, reality. Better stated, perhaps, as quantum reality. Because there are vast expanses of multiple universes of thought and experience and imagination that your brain and your heart and your soul have yet to visit, yet to register or perceive or comprehend. And this is an invitation to an exhilarating and radical humility, which, if practiced well, puts you on the same team as the wisest person who has ever lived, Socrates, who knew he didn't know, and yet persisted in asking deep questions and philosophizing, asking questions to the point of becoming so annoying to the power structures that the state decided it was best to execute Socrates. So the word of the day that Sunday morning was quantum. And true to my word about brushing up on those realms, quantum, after I arrived home from church, I went to my office and I pulled down the one book. And in fact, I believe it's the only book that I knew that I owned with the word quantum in its title, The Quantum Bigfoot. Bigfoot as in Sasquatch. Since I was a little boy, I've had a soft spot in my heart for Bigfoot. And as a mature adult, I've gathered together books about Bigfoot. And a few years ago, I attended a lecture from a quote unquote Bigfoot researcher. And to help financially support his ambitious research efforts, I bought all of his books, all of his CDs. And the CD that I love the best has recorded Bigfoot sounds. Now, that is a CD to listen to on a road trip, let me tell you. Now, someday, I've got this idea of someday presenting an entire sermon on Bigfoot. So this morning, I will simply quote a single sentence from the introduction to the Quantum Bigfoot. Quote, in this book, I am persuaded to present a reasonable correlation between the rules of quantum science as a foundation for spirituality and how it could relate to these creatures known as Bigfoot. And did you catch that? The rules of quantum science as the foundation of spirituality? Which brings us, of course, to the famous quote by Einstein, who was no stranger to the word quantum. Quote, the most beautiful emotion we can experience is the mystical. It is the power of all true art and science. They to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer wonder and stand wrapped in awe, are as good as dead. To know what is impenetrable to us really exists, manifesting itself as the highest wisdom and the most radiant beauty, which our dull faculties can comprehend only in their most primitive forms, this knowledge, this feeling, is at the center of true religiousness. In this sense, and in this sense only, I belong to the rank of devoutly religious people. Now, I love that idea. The most beautiful emotion that we can experience is the mystical. It is the power of all true art and science. And I recently witnessed the mystical come to life before my very eyes. Postcard number one. My neighbor, I'll call him Mr. X, was taking his morning walk around the block. Now, Mr. X is an ex-Marine, an ex-psychology teacher, an ex-back to the lander. He is tough as nails. He drinks strong Negronis every night. He rides a bicycle. He loves to kayak. He soaks most days in his hot tub, and he plays a mean banjo and guitar. And he is a devout atheist who just loves needling me about my attending church. Hey, Mr. X, I said when I saw him, how's it going? He stopped walking, looked in my direction. Everything is so beautiful, he said. Now, this did not sound like Mr. X. Now, please know it was an average winter morning up here in the Olympic Peninsula. The sun was behind clouds. It was misty gray. It was cool temperatures. What's beautiful? I asked as I crossed the street to be near him. Everything. Everything. I'm just so overwhelmed by it all. Look at that branch. It's so beautiful. And with his cane, he pointed to a leafless cherry tree, which in a few months would be festooned with blossoms and then, with the help of pollinators, develop into these gorgeous red cherries. I could see that Mr. X's eyes were brimmed with tears, and I instinctively knew that I was in the presence of a human being having a profound experience, what I will call a spiritual experience. We were not atop the Himalayas, nor were we practicing yoga in an ashram, nor were we walking the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral. We were neighbors, standing side by side on the weedy edge of a potholed road, early morning January, gray mist in the air, admiring the beauty of a bare branch of a cherry tree. And an old man's eyes filling with tears because the world was so utterly, fabulously, profoundly beautiful. Now, I chose to be silent, to not respond with words, to simply be with my neighbor, to bear witness to what was happening, and to nod at the words that he was inspired to share. Just look at that branch. Now, I could have been in the presence of William Blake or St. Teresa of Avila or Swedenborg or Rumi. Now, the branch was beautiful, though truth be told, I was looking with my eyes, while Mr. X was seeing with his entire being. He was seeing the branch with eyes rimmed with tears. The most beautiful emotion that we can experience is the mystical. It is the power of all true art and science. Postcard number 2. This past fall, excuse me, this past fall, a young person I know and love deeply was hospitalized for 10 days with a manic episode. They had never experienced mania. And while in the hospital, they experienced a psychotic break. Eventually, they were diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 1. Classic case, said the psychiatrist. Now, this is all new territory for them. After being released from the hospital after 10 days, I had the opportunity to spend some time with this person, to listen to their stories about how they were trying to figure out what happened, how to stay grounded, how to manage the regimes of medicine and therapy, and what lies ahead. Now, they shared that their mania was a profound experience, what they called a spiritual experience. Now, other people in their life, those who were helping this person through the hospitalization, doctors, nurses, loved ones, always called the phenomenon mania, a symptom of mental illness. Now, this person bristles at the phrase mental illness, though they never, ever, ever want to return to the depression that preceded the mania, the depression in which they suffered for the first time in their life suicidal ideation. They told me in the hospital, my favorite therapy sessions were called music therapy, where we would just listen to music. When I got out of the hospital, I was listening to music, self-therapy, I guess. And this song came up on my feed. It's a song that I'd never heard by an artist I didn't know. But after that last note faded, I pressed play on my phone and I listened again, and then again, and again, and then again, and again, and again. I just love the song. Do you want to hear it? Oh, definitely. Definitely. I definitely want to hear that song, I said. So they beseeched the internet gods to send the song through their phone by pressing play, the absolute best button on the planet, by the way, play, and sound filled the air. It was strangely familiar guitar, and then the lyrics started, and I instantly recognized the words. This was a very deep cut song by an independent folk singer, and the opening lyrics go like this. Inside the tunnels, the stone tunnels are the trains. And inside the trains, the steel trains are the bags of skin. And inside the thin skin are the blood and the bones. And inside the blood and the bones are the dreams. It really is that simple. It really is that fragile. I am one such dream inside the blood and the bones and the bags and the trains and the tunnels. There's a dream sitting next to me. There's a dream across from me. Fragile. I love that song, I said. I saw that folk singer at a live gig at this very small venue, and after the show, I bought a stack of his CDs. Excuse me for one second. I have got a bad cold, and what I am going to do is mute myself. Back to our regularly scheduled program. So on a recent road trip, I took along one of his CDs, which was just a random choice off the top of the pile. And I listened to it while I was driving down Highway 101, telling the story to her or them. And after I heard that song that you just played, I pressed play over and over and over and over again. I probably listened to that song 10 or 12 or 15 times in a row, just like you were doing 3,000 miles away. Given the timing, we might have been pressing play at the very same moment. The pause. How weird, how coincidental, how quantum is that? The song is called The Dreams by Peter Mulvey, ends with these lyrics. We all know that one day the tunnels will crumble and the trains will stop, and the blood and the bags and the bones will be gone. And in between now and then, something will happen to all the dreams. I don't know what will happen to the other dreams, but I know what will happen to me. Sure as rain, I know, sure as winter. I'll breathe and grieve and struggle and strive and love, love, love. And if I'm lucky, once, just once, the dream will drop to the floor like a vase and shatter in shards of silence, where I will see in the pattern of the pieces, I will see something. This will happen. But now the train with all its fragile cargo rolls on. Now, one aspect of what my friend loved about the song was the line where I will see in the pattern of the pieces, I will see something. Because in their mania, they saw patterns everywhere. They were able to make connections where there were formerly no discernible connections to make. This is a classic symptom of mania, this superhuman ability to make connections. And perhaps it's in a manic state where the Unitarian Universalist value of interdependence reveals itself most vividly. Quote, we honor the interdependent web of all existence with reverence for the great web of life, and with humanity. We acknowledge our place in it. We covenant to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care, respect, mutuality, and justice. We will work to repair harm, and damaged relationships. Again, Einstein. The most beautiful emotion we can experience is the mystical. It is the power of all true art and science. Postcard number 3, our final postcard. Your Postcard, a story or stories from your spiritual journey. Perhaps, excuse me for just one more second, I apologize.
Please unmute yourself.
Oh man, I did it, didn't I? I did the classic mistake. That's fantastic. I did a sermon last week. Oh, this is great. I did a sermon last week called Trust Falls and Failure Bows. And so now I think I need to do a failure bow. Thank you. I failed. We'll take it from the top here. Postcard number 3, your postcard. This is a story or stories from your spiritual journey. Perhaps you are like the millions of people with addictions to drugs or alcohol. You've entered treatment and began working at 12 steps. If you're sober and clean, you can likely tell us a vivid story of a spiritual experience along your journey towards sobriety, a spiritual journey if ever there was one. Perhaps you took LSD at a Grateful Dead show back in the day, and you danced like a whirling dervish and became the heartbeat of the universe. Perhaps you sat in Zen meditation and experienced that initial awakening called Kensho. Perhaps the world opened up at the birth of your child. Perhaps the world opened up at the death of your spouse. I know an attorney in Los Angeles who was the victim of a violent and brutal crime, who, after emerging from a coma, gave up his law practice, changed his name, and traveled to India searching for deeper meanings. Decades later, his memorial service took place in the sanctuary of a Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Corvallis, Oregon, standing room only. And the love expressed by those in mourning, just profound. Now, the gift that was freely given to everyone attending that celebration of life service was his legendary sourdough starter. And thus life goes on in the form of warm loaves and toast and tea. Perhaps you dove into a cold river after soaking in a hot springs and felt overdrive alive. Perhaps this morning you sipped tea and you truly tasted tea. Perhaps, perhaps, perhaps the possibilities are endless. Now, to quote the French philosopher and Jesuit priest Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, quote, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Just look at that branch." Amen.